talk TikTok and TikTok risks and social media risks for dentists and specialists. Did you know that about 70% of teens age 13 to 17 are active on TikTok? And about a quarter of those teens say that they are using TikTok almost constantly. I have a special guest that we're going to talk to today about social media risks. And Amy, tell us, what do dentists need to be aware of when it comes to social media risks in general?
Social media can be fantastic for your business, but just like everything else with your business, it can either be your best asset or your worst liability. And unfortunately, in my line of work, I tend to focus on the worst liability and work our way backwards from there. With TikTok in particular, it's really important for everyone to know that it is owned by China. So China as a state entity actually owns TikTok. And the reason that's scary is because of how cybersecurity risks are with that nation state. Now, what's interesting to know is how cybersecurity affects us in the US and how China is different than every other country. So the US has approximately 3,000 government based individuals, and we have subcontractors and other businesses that help. But we have about 3,000 people on government payroll right now that protect us from cyber threats. Whereas Russia has about 300,000, China has about 3 million. And their goal is really corporate espionage. It's taking trade secrets from businesses and then flooding the market with substandard products. And the scary part of that for small businesses, especially like dental professionals, is that your business actually has trade secrets you don't even know about. And you have government regulations such as HIPAA and PCI and other various recommendations and guidance and even regulation, even on a state level. So you have a lot of things to protect. And what most people in dental don't understand is that when you have access to something, you have access to everything. So something like TikTok could very easily worm its way into all of your systems and get access to everything else.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, Amy, and for sharing your expertise. Let's tell people a little bit about where your background and your experience and all of your knowledge comes from, so they'll really, can grasp the depth of your knowledge.
Instead of just being the scary lady that talks about cyber stuff. Yeah. So I'm Amy Wood. I'm CEO of Copper Penny Consulting, and I specialize in HIPAA, cybersecurity, and data breaches for the dental vertical. And I got into this because my own dental x-rays were involved in a data breach, and my identity ended up for sale on the dark web over 10 years ago. So I've personally been victimized by someone not understanding the value of an x-ray. And that was the point where I realized that dental really doesn't understand how valuable that information they have on patients is, and they really don't understand how the threat landscape has changed or how to actually protect it. So in healthcare, you guys use the phrase standard of care, and everybody understands what that is and how it changes. Now with technology and security, it just changes at a much faster pace. So trying to keep up on it and understand it is very difficult.
Yeah.
There's people like me.
I think, yes, you're so invaluable to practices. And, one of the hot topics right now that we're talking about, today and focusing on is TikTok. And I think a question for you, also, Amy, is, I talk to a lot of teams and they're like, well, Meta, and Facebook, and Instagram already have all of our data anyways. They already, have all of our information, from over the years. And what's the difference between that, Meta, who owns Facebook, and Instagram owning our data, or Twitter, or any other social media platform versus TikTok?
The big difference is laws and access and laws that restrict that access. And in the US, we have the justice system that requires court orders to see or access or distribute or use data against you in any kind of legal proceeding. It also has trickled down into the states where, like I'm in California, we have probably some of the worst laws when it comes to this because Facebook is here. And there's actually a whole law here that started with Facebook. And we have California Consumer Privacy Act, and it specifically states that Facebook is the impetus for this. So they had what's called data scraping. They sold data to Cambridge Analytica and they would do data scraping. So anytime someone would take one of those Facebook quizzes, it would scrape all the data, your birth date, your contacts, your like everything out of your profile, and it would be sold and hackers would end up using that against you. And a lot of that data would end up on the dark web for sale. And what would end up happening is hackers would build files on individual people and they would sell that data as well. So there was a ton of money to be made on this at the consumer's expense and business
Yeah.
owners' expense. So now there's laws and rules surrounding this. China doesn't really have those safeguards in place for you. If someone in government, even low level government, wants to access data that's in Chinese control, all they have to do is say, I'm a government official of any capacity and I want access to it, and they get it. So
Wow.
there's no safeguards at all. There's no stopping points. It's it's not the same at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that. And what is your is it some sort of a certification or something that you had said you could go and work for the actually work for the government with your knowledge specialty that you
I
have?
do. I have a certification from ISC Squared. It's one of the foremost authorities in my field. I'm a healthcare information privacy practitioner, healthcare information system. I had to look at it. I know it's a HCISPP.
I don't feel
Um,
bad for not remembering exactly what the acronym is now then.
yeah, well, most people don't know what HIPAA stands for, so that's okay too. But that certification, I'm able to work for Department of Defense or any hospital in the country. But I feel that dental is such a underserved market, and they really don't understand what's happening. And I dental's near and dear to my heart. I've been working in the dental space for almost 20 years in healthcare IT and now security and now privacy and all of these things kind of coalesced largely because of my own identity being compromised and to my knowledge there's only 1,400 people internationally that have that certification and I only know of two others in the dental space that have that.
Yeah, that's amazing. You're definitely my go-to now at the top of my list for all things related to safety and security online. And I do want to also mention, because people might think we're picking on TikTok, and we're going to talk about a couple of other social media risks, during this conversation. But I did want to bring up what in my research that I realized recently that Grinder was sold to a China based company, I think around 2017, 2016. And this isn't the first time that these issues have come up. I had to make a note so I wouldn't forget. It's the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States that evaluates these different business transactions, and that's who's evaluating the whole TikTok US, structure and how that's going to work out. And so what happened was Grinder was sold to a China-based company, and this same entity in the U.S. They evaluated the situation and said, "No, this is not going to work. It's not going to happen." They forced the sale from the China-based company back to the U.S., and that sale went through. I believe it was sometime around 2019. And I wasn't even aware of that until I started digging a little bit deeper on how these processes work. But obviously, that China-based company sold back to the U.S. and then it became a public company. I think they sold for much more than what they were able to, what they had to pay, China for that company. So that was really profitable for the U.S.-based company that took over it after all of that. But I think the most important point that I want to make here is that this isn't unusual, this process that, we're going through with TikTok. And that's what I want dentists and specialists to be aware of, especially if you're putting all of your content on that rented land. You have to be really careful. We've heard about this in the past. Don't put your content on rented land, but it's a lot different when it's US based versus foreign owned. So we really want to continue to pay attention to that, and just realize that I think the tricky thing here, and I'm curious to hear your opinion on this too, Amy, is that the algorithm with TikTok is what is so special and unique about this situation. If we said it has to be a US owned company, China's not so easily going to give up the secret to that algorithm because they value it so much. So I don't know. What's your take on that?
Well, that's their intellectual property. And the ironic thing is that's the whole point of China's cybersecurity initiative, is to hack into other other countries' businesses to steal trade secrets so that they can flood the market with substandard and cheaper products to make themselves money. So it's very ironic that that's the case. They don't want to give up their intellectual property because of that, but at the same time, they're doing everything they can to steal other people's intellectual property for their own profit. Um, it's also important to note that the way that the laws in China are written, um, Apple faced this with wanting to go into the Asian markets, and Google faced this with wanting to go into the Asian markets. That you have to have separate servers in China that anyone, like I said before, anyone Chinese government can access at any given time for any purpose that they want. And they can then give that information to any businesses. So, with large companies like that, they have separated certain servers and they have some security in place for Apple users that are in China and Google users that are in China. And what's also ironic about that is Google's slogan used to be "Do no evil," and now it's, well, maybe just a little bit of evil. And so they've had to actually change their logo and their slogan because they're operating in China. So, I mean, user beware. You've been
Yes.
informed at this point, you know the risks, but you also have to remember that you have regulated, sensitive patient information. And if you're using TikTok in the office, there are things you can and cannot do. You need permission for certain things. You shouldn't be sharing x rays of patients on TikTok that have valuable information on them. Uh, you know, consider that your intellectual property. That's important.
Yeah.
And it's actually not owned by the practices. Those records and the information on the patients are owned by the patients. So,
Yeah.
Facebook and Instagram are much safer places for that. And just keep in mind there is more regulation at this point, which puts some parameters around what those companies are allowed to do on U.S. soil.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. There's so many variables to what's going on right now. I thought what was really interesting, and one of the reasons I mentioned that stat at the beginning of the interview about the percentage of people, a quarter of people that are using TikTok 30 and under are now getting their news from the app. I thought that was really interesting because if it were considered a media company, they would be under even more scrutiny by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. But because it's considered social media and more entertainment, it's not under the same level of scrutiny. So there's all these different aspects of what's going on right now, and that's what concerns me, and that's what I want our audience to be aware of. Just be aware. I think your big takeaway at the end of the day is don't put all of your content solely on TikTok. Do I think it's going to disappear? Probably not. But who knows what's going to happen because it's kind of a wild card, right? Like we mentioned with the algorithm and the value that China places on that. So we have to see. And so your takeaway is when it comes to TikTok, make sure that you're putting that unbranded content. So don't have the TikTok logo on your content. Share those videos, those short form videos on Instagram Reels or on Facebook Reels. And also YouTube Shorts are becoming really popular. And it's crazy, about 90%, pretty much almost everyone that's a teen is going to be using YouTube. It's like in the 90 percentage. category. So you can't go wrong by putting copies of your content on YouTube. So that's your big takeaway for that when it comes to TikTok. Amy
And I
kind of,
agree absolutely on YouTube. I have teenage girls, so they're constantly sending me YouTube videos. So I can attest personally. Yes, teenagers
yes,
are doing that.
yeah, yeah, for sure.